backing out of the accordingly shift, and we can edit all this part out.
Okay.
So give yourself a deep breath before you begin. Good luck.
I'm Elizabeth Acton, and I will be speaking the affirmative side of the Edward de Vere versus Shakespeare authorship debate. The work of William Shakespeare is said to be the best pieces of literature ever written. English courses in high schools and colleges use them to teach many lessons. Lovers of literature are in awe of his work, and overall the sonnets, plays, and detail in character is remarkable. Who wouldn't love them? However, recently it has been a very big debate that in fact the so-called works of Shakespeare were not his, and were actually Edward de Vere's pieces, and the name Shakespeare came from spear shaker. His coat of arms has a lion brandishing a spear. Today, my partner and I come to you in firm affirmation to the debate that William Shakespeare did not write the works of Shakespeare. The first point I would like to make is the knowledge of French and Italian and modern literature. Shakespeare was familiar with the Italian and French authors and literature. Some Shakespeare scholars have noted that the material in his plays originated not with available English translations, but directly from Italian and French sources. It is unclear how the Stratfordian would have acquired both his language skills in Italian and French, and more importantly, access to the literature that formed the basis of Shakespeare's plays. Grammar school, nighttime reading, and access to knowledgeable persons would be insufficient. De Vere studied French as part of his education in the household of William Cecil. He wrote a letter in French at the age of 13. He would have had access to Cecil's library, and he traveled in France and Italy. As a wealthy man, he would have been able to buy books. As a nobleman in the English court, he would have had access to the best minds in England and abroad. The second point I would like to make is Shakespeare's knowledge of law. Shakespearean and legal experts frequently cite Shakespeare's understanding of law. One legal expert observed that Shakespeare had a deep technical knowledge of the law and an easy familiarity with some of the most abstruse proceedings in English jurisprudence. Legal phrases are common in the plays. Words are frequently used in their legal interpretations. The Merchant of Venice provides an example of Shakespeare's knowledge of the law, since it revolves around the legal meaning of a pound of flesh. In Hamlet, the legal intricacies of Hales versus Pettit are comically presented by the gravediggers as they discuss Ophelia's death. The third point I would like to make is Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford, is known to have composed, directed, and acted in plays around the same time as Shakespeare. Edward de Vere was the leaseholder of the Blackfriars Theatre, a rival to the Globe. Similarities in Edward de Vere's verse to Shakespeare suggest, however, that such a leap in poetry composing was possible. Specifically, 6-line pentameter stanzas in Venus and Adonis occur only in Edward de Vere's early poems and yet are not repeated by other poets of Shakespeare's time. Moreover, Oxford conceived theatrical entertainment for the Queen at Whitehall, and he acquired the lease to the Blackfriars Theatre. He was a patron of many writers and several distinguished acting companies. He became one of the leading recipients of literary dedications and verses by writers such as John Lyly and Edmund Spenser, and was himself widely regarded as one of England's most excellent writers, acclaimed so even in his youth. However, by the time he was an adult, George Puttenham, in The Art of English Poesy, confirmed not only that many writers at the Elizabethan court were concealing themselves as writers, which was a custom of the age, but revealed that Oxford in particular, amongst those courtiers, was masking his identity as a writer. The fourth point I would like to make is Shakespeare was not cultured or educated enough to write about the things he did. Edward de Vere fits the bill since he is known to have graduated from Cambridge University at age 14, becoming Master of the Arts at age 16. Oxford journeyed extensively on the continent. He traveled throughout France and Italy. He visited almost all of the Italian locations, including Sicily, that later would provide the settings for Shakespeare's Italian plays. Despite a massive manhunt going back more than 2 centuries, not a single letter written in Shakespeare's hand or book he owned has ever been found. Shakespeare of Stratford did not educate his children. His daughters were illiterate. The author of Shakespeare's work had to be familiar with a wide body of knowledge for his time: law, which he accurately employs as many as 600 legal terms, music, foreign languages, the classics, and aristocratic manners in sports. There is no documentation that William Shakespeare of Stratford had access to such information. Unlike other major playwrights of the period, he did not attend college or receive legal training. Shakespeare's will, noteworthy for its detailed disposal of household items, contains no mention of books, manuscripts, desks, shelves, pens, paper, or anything suggesting literary interest. In conclusion, Edward de Vere is the author of Shakespeare's work. My partner and I agree that there has been a huge mistake in authorship, and we want to see it changed. The true author must be recognized. I am now open for any questions and points of clarification.
Hi, I'm Lanae Tafoya, and I'm here to speak on the negative side of the William Shakespeare being the real author of his writings. First off, I'd like to start by saying the evidence of Bard or Shakespeare have written his plays comes from the first folio in 1623. This book combined with 36 of William's plays, recording and publishing them for the first time. Its co-author, John Hemmings, was also a shareholder for the Globe and belonged to the same acting company as did Shakespeare, and so would have been primary to the true author. Proof that the famous bard was also a poet is equally clear. His first poem, Venus and Adonis, was published in 1592. My partner and I agree that William Shakespeare, the bard, has written his works and not Edward de Vere. We therefore feel Shakespeare's works should be accredited to him and not to Edward de Vere. At this time, we would like to offer these definitions from the Webster's Dictionary. Folio, which is an individual leaf of paper or parchment numbered on the recto or front side, only occurring either loose or one of the series or forming part of a board volume. Bard, tribble, poet, singer skilled in composing and reciting. William Shakespeare was often called the bard. My partner and I believe that William Shakespeare should receive all credit for his work due to the following reasons. First reason is William Shakespeare was a well-known author and poet. Shakespeare first gained notice of the writing world in 1592. In a pamphlet by Robert Greene that refers to him as an upstart crow, the work of a veteran writer way to the new blood. In 1594 and 1595, there are records of favorable race, and by 1598 he was already famous enough to be worth the time of publishers to attach his names to works they wanted to sell. That same year, 1598, sees praise for Shakespeare by Richard Barnfield and Francis Mears. This letter is worth mentioning because he wrote an essay entitled Comparative Discourse of Our English Poets, an account of 80 English writers that also makes mention of Edward de Vere. By 1605, Shakespeare was mentioned by William Camden, one of the most well-known historians of the time, as one of the best contemporary writers. Shakespeare's name was on all of his works as well. Dates of proof. William Shakespeare's plays were written between the years of 1590 and 1613. With that being said, Edward de Vere died in 1604. So if Edward de Vere was the real author of the writings, what happened between the last 9 years after Edward de Vere had died? Part number 3 to this case is Shakespeare performed for Queen Elizabeth. A more curriculum evidence comes from the fact that the famous playwright performed for Queen Elizabeth at her court, The Merry Wives of Windsor, in 1596, and A Midsummer's Night Dream in 1603. They watched many of the performances of the Bard, commanding the king's men personally for their performances of The Merchant of Venus in 1605. After this information was presented, my partner and I believe all credits of William Shakespeare should be given to him, since he is the real author. I am open to any questions and points of clarification at this time.
I am Rocky Leslie speaking for the negative side for Shakespeare being the true author of his works. My opponent was saying that it. Edward de Vere had great language skills and graduated college at 14 and was a very smart and knowledgeable person. But language and knowledge does not define a great author. It doesn't matter if somebody graduates early. They could have been graduating for something else instead of writing. And my opponent also said that the Edward de Vere was a shareholder in the Globe's rival. So my question would be, why would de Vere write such amazing work for his opponent? That just doesn't make any sense to me. And with all that, I believe that Shakespeare was the true author. I am speaking on the affirmation of this debate for the following reasons. His Edward de Vere's knowledge of French, Italian, and modern literature. De Vere studied Italian, and which was based off of most of Shakespeare's plays. His knowledge of law, and de Vere is known to have composed and directed and acted in many plays. My opponents stated in their main points that William Shakespeare was well known, and how de Vere died in 1604. So how could that have been de Vere's writings? And William Shakespeare played in front of Queen Elizabeth. The flaws in this are just because William Shakespeare was well known doesn't mean that he automatically wrote that work. That's irrelevant to the debate. De Vere's death in 1604 doesn't mean that de Vere did not write his work. He could have written it and had plays left over that Shakespeare got and finished for him and produced for him. So that would also make no sense. There is no evidence saying that just because he died, that those works still couldn't have been his. Playing in front of Queen Elizabeth, that is also irrelevant because just because he played in front of Queen Elizabeth doesn't mean that they are his writings. He could have simply did the plays in front of her, doesn't mean he wrote them. William Shakespeare also did not attend any kind of law school, college, anything like that to have the knowledge of all of the surroundings that most of the plays were based in, and for that we believe that you should vote in the affirmation of this debate.
I'm speaking again for the affirmative side of the Edward de Vere versus Shakespeare debate. The first point I want to make is language and knowledge are the core of literary works, no matter who writes them. If a play is written in French and the supposed author is not educated or knows French, how did they write it? And education is critical for knowing what to write about. The basis of Shakespeare's stories revolve around laws and locations that he would have not gone to. And with the Blackfriar Theatre versus the Globe Theatre, de Vere could have bought shares to support a friend, and since he was an aristocrat, he wasn't supposed to write, and he probably just wanted to get his plays out there no matter who published them. I am now open to any questions and points of clarification.
So one of the first points that my opponent with saying was the fact that their language, that Edward de Vere had the knowledge and the language of the way the plays and poets are right. Well, it could be the way that they're saying, but if you think about it, they're trying to say that if you like, so the language that it's wrote in is sure the way that Edward de Vere spoke and knew everything in, but that doesn't mean that there's no way that Shakespeare could have learned another language to go with it by. Um, and with that, also the fact that his plays, they were rivals. So with the 9 years after De Vere had died, the plays were still published. Why would De Vere, or well, why would Shakespeare have finished De Vere's work if it was actually De Vere's work, if they were rivals? Yeah. So I'm open to any points of clarification.
I am again speaking of the negative of the debate against Shakespeare being the true author of his work. And Edward de Vere cannot be the true author because they were rivals. De Vere died before all of Shakespeare's works were published. If anybody would have been a true author to Shakespeare's works, it would have been John Hemmings, not Edward de Vere, because John Hemmings was partners with Shakespeare, helping him with his works. Therefore, William Shakespeare is the true author of all of his poems and sonnets and plays. I'm here today in affirmation of the debate. William Shakespeare didn't write his own work. I'll start by attacking my opponent's 3 main points, and if time allows, I will rebuild my own case. In my opponent's last speech, they for a second doubted that Shakespeare wrote his own work and said that it was Hemmings. That right there says that they're not in full belief that Shakespeare wrote it himself. Shakespeare being well known is also, again, irrelevant. Doesn't mean that he's well known. Doesn't mean that he's the one that wrote the works. Dates of proof, as my opponent said, they were rivals, so wouldn't it have made sense that after De Vere's death, Shakespeare would have taken on the rest of the works and made it his own, trying to claim the credit? And he performed in front of Queen Elizabeth. However, that again does not mean that he's the one that wrote them. It just means that he's the one that performed them in front of them. And back to mine and my partner's case, it is clear that the knowledge of the French and Italian and modern literature would play a very good part on how the whole thing would work out, because most of Shakespeare's plays are based in foreign countries when William Shakespeare himself did not travel, and there is proof of that. De Vere studied many of these languages, making it more believable that he's the one that wrote them. His knowledge of law is also another reason. And De Vere acted in most of the plays, which would give him more of a ground on how it would work. And therefore, we believe that you should vote in affirmation of today's debate.